welcome back. We're talking Fabric. We just created a stored procedure in the data warehouse, and now, Marcus, we're gonna create a pipeline to use it. Is that right?
Exactly right, Chris. We now have all of the components for our metadata-driven framework, and now we want to take advantage of those and set up our pipeline process to ingest data into our data warehouse.
Oh, I can't wait to see this.
Let's get right to it. I will share my screen. All right, so within Fabric here, we are in our data engineering experience. And at the top here, we're going to click Data Pipeline to create a new pipeline in our Fabric workspace. So I'm going to call this pipeline PL for pipeline underscore data because it's a data related pipeline. And we're going to copy blob data to our warehouse. So it's going to be PL data copy blob underscore WH for warehouse. And we're going to hit create. All right, so in previous videos, we talked about some of the components of needing to be set up before we can leverage those in our pipeline for our metadata-driven framework. So the first component we're going to add is we're going to add a stored procedure activity to our pipeline. So if we go to activities, at our menu at the top here, we can see that stored procedure is an activity. And we're going to name this audit pipeline run start as the activity name. We're going to change our timeout to be an hour instead of 12 hours. Change our retry cadence to 3 as a best practice there, which we hit on in previous videos and explain why filling those in is important there. Now we're going to select our stored procedure. And if you haven't watched previous videos, we show you how to set this stored procedure up. So go back and watch the video around this stored procedure setup. We're going to select data store type workspace. We're then going to select our data warehouse that the stored procedure is in. So we're going to select BT demo warehouse there. And we can see our pipeline run upsert stored procedure here. Now, before moving on to the next step, we need to define the values going into those parameters that we set up in that stored procedure. Now, I could add them in manually, or I can select this import option here, and Fabric will go and look at that stored procedure and import all my parameters dynamically right into my screen.
Wow, that's nice.
Super nice. Saves me tons of time of having to go back to that stored procedure, remember what parameters I put in, define the data types, and type all of that in. We can do that dynamically right through that import option. So now I'm going to fill out my values in this stored procedure. So the end time UTC, we're actually going to treat as null to start because we're not going to have an end time at the start of our pipeline run. As a reminder, within the values, I can go to add dynamic content here. And underneath the system variables option, I have a number of out-of-the-box variables that Fabric provides for me in my pipeline experience. So I'm going to do that for a number of these values here in my parameters. So this first one here, parent pipeline run ID, this is going to be if your pipeline is being invoked by a parent pipeline, it will capture the run ID of that parent pipeline. If there is no trigger value for that parent pipeline, like there won't be in this case, it'll just treat that value as null for you. So you can see after I filled that in and hit OK, that value is then populated. Pipeline completed successfully. We're also going to treat this as 0 for the start. Hopefully, when our pipeline does complete successfully, we will have an end step to update that to a value of 1. For our pipeline ID, we'll fill in that variable there. And we'll go through for the remainder of these values. This process value here is meant to be a string that the user would input, so describing what I'm doing here. So I'm just going to put in copy blob files into data warehouse. My start time UTC, I'm going to put as the pipeline trigger time, so it's going to capture the time that the pipeline was started. And then workspace ID is going to be my Fabric workspace that the pipeline is saved in. Okay. So now I have my starting step defined for my pipeline. The next step I'm going to insert is a lookup step. So on the activities menu at the top, we're going to go lookup. And I'm going to drag the on success arrow over to my lookup activity. Now, one of the other prerequisite steps we had for a metadata framework is setting up a metadata table, where we have defined our tables that or files we're going to be loading from our blob storage and defining what those table definitions are in our Fabric data warehouse. So I'm going to call this activity lookup metadata load table, which is the name of the table we created. Again, I'm going to change that to an hour for timeout and a retry count of 3. And now in the settings, I'm going to select data warehouse as the data store type, BT demo warehouse. And I'm going to go down and look for that metadata.load table that I have there. One of the default options that's checked is, again, this first row only. In this case, we do not want only the first row to come back, so I'm going to uncheck that option. And just to make sure I have the right table selected, I'm going to select preview data here and ensure that that table does have rows that I'm going to be bringing back for my pipeline process. Okay. 2 steps done. Now we're going to incorporate a for each activity into our pipeline, which is going to loop through each of the defined source files, folders that we're going to be ingesting into our data warehouse. So I'm going to drag the on success arrow to the for each. I'm going to change the name of the for each activity to for each source folder. And in the settings, I'm going to leave sequential and batch count unchanged. I'm going to leave those as defaults. But we do need to define which items I'm bringing through. So within the pipeline expression builder, I'm going to pull through the output of my previous activity, which is that lookup activity. So I'm going to click on, in the activity output section, lookup metadata load table dot output, and I'm going to add dot value to ensure that I'm getting the finalized values that are returned in that lookup activity. So it's going to say for each row in that table that's being looked up, do a for each activity for each one of those records.
Make sure you hit that dot value, otherwise it's going to be really wonky for you.
Correct. If you don't add the dot value, it will not perform as expected, doing a loop for each record in that table. So make sure you add that piece, append that to the end of the output statement. So now I need to add an activity in my for each activity. So in here, this is where we're going to add our copy data step. And we're going to give that a name, copy blob to warehouse or WH. Going to change our timeout to an hour. Again, our retry to 3. Next, we're going to define our source. So within here, we're going to select an existing connection to our public blob storage account. And then we're going to define our file path that we're going to be copying. So within here, we're going to do sample. And then for our directory, it's going to be wide world importers DW / parquet / tables. And for the file name, we're going to be using a concatenate or a concat expression to pull through the item stage table name from our lookup activity that we're capturing in the previous step. And we're going to be pulling through any of the files that end in .parquet. So the last thing we need to change here is our file format, and we need to match that with a Parquet file type that we're going to be pulling through. And we're going to leave all the advanced settings unchanged as they were there. Next, we're going to move to our destination. We're going to pick data warehouse. We're going to select our BT demo warehouse to land the data in. Since we don't have these tables selected, what we're going to do is select the auto create table option. So if I hover over the information icon here, it says it automatically creates the table if non-existent in the source schema. Now, with that, I need to define a schema and a table name for each object. And since I only have a single activity, I need to do this dynamically. So we're going to pull open our pipeline expression builder again. And we're going to utilize 2 columns again from that metadata table that we're looking up from our lookup activity. So for schema, we're going to pull through the defined stage schema for this table. And similarly, for the table name, we're going to pull through the stage table name that's also defined in that table. So I'm going to use the item function, which is saying give me the individual value for each table record that we're looping through. And within that record, in this case, give me the stage table name for that. So I now have my copy activity defined. I'm going to navigate back to my main canvas through the breadcrumbs there. And I'm going to add one more activity to the end of my pipeline. Now within the pipeline UI, I can simply copy an activity through the keyboard. So Control C, and then I can Control V, paste that activity to do a duplicate of, in this case, the store procedure activity that we set up as step 1. But I'm going to do a few tweaks to call this audit pipeline run end. And on my configuration, I'm now going to fill in the end time UTC. And for that, I'm going to use the UTC now function. And for my pipeline completed successfully, I'm going to change that from a 0 to a 1 to indicate that that did complete successfully. Okay, now that we have our pipeline configured, Chris, I think it's time to run our pipeline and ingest our data from our blob storage into our data warehouse.
Let's do it.
I'm going to hit run up here on the home menu. And that's going to trigger my pipeline. And I'm going to refresh my pipeline output here, and we could see that it kicked off our stored procedure to log our audit row. And now it's going to go into copying our data.
Come on, let's see it go. You can do it.
Okay, we have one succeeded. While the pipeline is finishing its run, hopefully, let's go back to our warehouse and check out the audit record that was captured from our store procedure start.
Well, this is exciting.
And look at that, we can see that our pipeline was kicked off. And I'm already seeing an end time being captured in there. So that should mean the pipeline is completed. Let's head back to the output screen and look at that.
Wow.
The pipeline successfully completed.
Wow, that is unbelievable, Marcus. Thank you so much for showing us how to set this up. This just brings an unbelievable amount of scale to any size company. So this is fantastic. Thank you.
Not a problem, Chris. Stay tuned for more videos from Baker Tilly Digital as we help hopefully all of you through your fabric data experience.
Awesome.